Good morning, everyone. This is the Monday, March 27th meeting of the Dunn County Planning, Resource and Development Committee. Call the meeting to order. It's like all of the committee members are present. So the next item would be approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion? Supervisor Bjork? Supervisor Morehouse seconds. Any questions, comments, additions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Do we have any public comments other than the one? So we all got some submitted comments and have read them, so we won't read them today. We don't have a public hearing. Thinking about the agenda, Heather has this 9A, a resolution from the state to the state about revising the current real estate transfer fee. And then Chase has update on the groundwater ad hoc committee recommendations. Those two items won't take long. So I'm wondering if the committee would be okay with moving them up to the top of the agenda, and then the somewhat 31-page discussion that we have will be after that. Heather's not here now, so we'll start with Chase.
No pressure for me either. I have Heather Wood coming on her way down right now. She's going to give a short presentation on the status of the private well monitoring program, and specifically related to some of the discussion on the PFAS results. So to start with, let me get my screen shared here. I'll let her get settled in and she can load up here. So on the screen, you should see our typical ad hoc report. So not a whole lot of progress specific to any one items here. Certainly a lot of our work has been revolving around this private well monitoring program. We have I think as a date that I put this out, and Heather will update us here in a minute as to the actual numbers, but 967 private wells at the time. I know we're over that now, so we're probably pushing close to that 1,000. We're continuing to receive requests to participate in the program, which really it's kind of waned a little bit, but it's still to the point where we're probably going to start having a waiting list. So in case people that did sign up that maybe changed their mind or forgot, who knows what the circumstances where they don't get their well tested, then we would follow up with them with follow up with that waiting list. So there's been certainly some conversations, some things happening that we referenced the last time we had this on the agenda regarding some of the agricultural connections, looking at some of the grant that's UW Stout received for the it's going to be known as the Red Cedar Learning Hub, and the connection of that marketing and potential grazing and those impacts to groundwater and the economy as well. So we touched on that. You ready, Heather?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get into the Zoom link.
And as a somewhat related topic, I've been, I'll talk about this probably next week or next committee meeting as well, but Earth Day, April 22nd, I've been asked to present at the Rossbach Museum, part of the Community Conversations group, kind of present on the Land and Water Conservation Division. So we'll have more to prep and prepare for that, but in relationship to this groundwater efforts, I think there'll be certainly some conversation there. So.
Chase, I know you were meeting with, on another topic, I know you were meeting with Pierce and Pepin counties about Lake O'Galley. Anything coming of that?
There's another meeting scheduled this Friday. So it's a 4-county potential project that's being kind of scoped out right now between Pepin, Pierce, St. Croix, and Dunn, and focusing on the O'Galley watershed. We have probably just a slightly larger portion than the other counties. So we're trying to evaluate some of our, what's going to be needed for this project, but certainly identifying, the assessment or inventory for that watershed and looking at ways that, with the federal infrastructure funds and some of the other federal funds coming through NRCS, how that might impact that entire watershed. So, as a reminder, I think I mentioned it before, but Lake O'Galley formed an association. So there's an association there kind of working on some projects with sedimentation of that lake. And we've always said, well, our capacity within lake management is limited, but we work in the watershed. Well, now we're trying to scope something out for the larger watershed. So there'll be a good partnership there. I'll turn it over to Heather now. She's got
Can I
thrown
ask one
together.
question?
Oh, yeah.
One question. Has there been any sense of starting a farmer-led watershed for the area? Would that be a vehicle to work out some of those projects, or?
It
not?
certainly could, it could be in that, I don't know to the extent historically, if that's how far that's been pushed, but there is a good group of connected landowners and farmers down there. That would be something to explore. I know it's been brought up, since I've been here briefly, but never really pushed too much. So yes, that's a great idea, and it might one that might have a good strong partner in the whole watershed effort too. So,
All right, so I found that for me, visuals are generally pretty helpful. So this is kind of just a quick outline of where we're at, where we're going, and some of what we have right now for results. So like Chase said, we were at 200 or 960, whatever. When I left the office on Thursday, we were at 987. And when I got in this morning, there are definitely some folks hanging out in my email inbox and a few voicemails I need to tend to. So I will likely be having to start a wait list here in probably by the end of this week. But that being said, I've talked to Krista up in IT, and she's pulled down the online form, except for the submit button, which has been a real fun thing. Because you can still submit blank forms. I won't get any information, but I will get a form that somebody tried the submit button. But we're trying to direct people to contact me directly, so that way I can tell them, hey, you're on the wait list. We're kind of anticipating for some folks to drop out at some point, because that's how it happens and things like this. And we've been taking signups since December. We're going to be getting out to do sampling in May, so that'll really kind of vary. That'll affect how things play out. I'm going to be closing signups here probably in a week or two. We'll see how the waitlist situation goes and all that. But right now, this is kind of the spatial distribution. And there are some townships where it looks like there's not that many folks signed up. In all reality, when compared to population size, this is a pretty good range. It's not really terribly surprising that Menominee, Red Cedar, and Tainter have a ton of people in there, because they're the most populous municipalities in the county. Likewise, it's not terribly similar that there's only 9 folks in Sand Creek, because there's not that many folks up there. So the spread's actually really good. When we're looking at the point map, it's actually really impressive, because we were half expecting to have to target some areas. We were expecting things to kind of cluster, and they didn't really. I mean, there's definitely some clusters, like around the lake, but that's kind of to be expected. Really, there's only a couple of small gap areas to a point where we're not even really going to do much targeting efforts. But I'll be closing the signups here, like I said, a couple weeks. In the tail end of January, I got out to almost all of the town halls and did all of the sampling there. And that was where we had budgeted for the PFAS, PFOA testing, as well as the comprehensive homeowners package through UW Stevens Point. And we did that. 21 of the 22 town halls, we got sampled for PFAS or PFOA compounds. The one that didn't get sampled, I'm trying to work with the clerk to get up there and sample their town hall come election day, because it'll be open, and I'm hoping they'll have their well dewinterized. 5 of the town halls that we did samples, it wasn't the true town halls. Some of them are on municipal systems, some of them don't have wells, and some of them are winterized. So we had some folks kind of step in as proxies, and their private residences were used as stand-ins for their town halls, so we could get a data point particularly for the PFAS, PFOA sampling. Because we had only budgeted for one per town. We didn't budget for, everybody in the private homeowner portion of this project to get that sample. So I wanted to have that PFAS PFOA data point. And then 20 of the 22 got the comprehensive homeowners package. I ran into some technical difficulties when I was at one of my proxy sites and they were not home. They knew I was there sampling and stuff, but they're like, we're in Arizona, so we can't really help you much. So I'm going to be getting back up there to collect that sample as well as the same sample that didn't get hit with the PFOA compounding or compound testing. And then the comprehensive homeowners package, that is what we're offering for the private well package or for the private well participants. And that's got a whole slew of things, nitrates, metals, all that jazz. And that's what we tested for in the townhouse as well. And this is kind of what it looks like. And it's a little bit Christmas tree-esque. But yep. So we tested for 33 compounds. That is, we went through the state lab of hygiene and they had two options. There's one that tests for 18 compounds and there's one that tests for 33. The one that tests for 33 tests for all of the same 18 that DHS is particularly concerned with. I mean, they're concerned with all of them, but there's kind of 18 that they really focus on. And then we said, well, we'll go for that plus. Now, this looks like a lot. All of the red blobs tested positive. And there are some spots where it's not terribly surprising. But then, up in that northwest corner, not many folks, I imagine, would have expected that. But further conversation with, the state lab and our friends down in public health, they're everywhere. PFAS and PFOAs are everywhere. Now, the good news about this is that none of these sites exceeded any current standards. There's a hazard index calculator available through DHS. It's through Sea Grant, but DHS recommends going through it. And even for the site that had the highest amount of hits and highest concentrations of compounds, they didn't hit the threshold to be considered a hazard on the DHS's hazard index. These were all well below current standards, which are 70 parts per trillion, but they were also well below the proposed EPA standards of 4 parts per trillion, which is quite the drop. So we're still well below any level of current health standards, which is good. And there's really no way to know the exact source. I mean, this has been an educational journey, and there's the common waterproofing, firefighting foam, that sort of stuff. They're starting to find it in things like toilet paper. So yeah, we have no clue where exactly all this stuff's coming from. It could be any combination of sources. It could be, there's really no way to pick and choose where exactly it's coming from. But the good news is that it's all well below standard, well within safe drinking limits, current and proposed. The nitrate testing. So this map is only showing the town hall values. This doesn't include the data points that we have for the respective towns already. We haven't done any of the private well testing, but we do still have data from the map, the well viewer online right now. But this is just the town halls or their proxies. The highest value was 21.7. So that's high, but that was also at a town hall that has a test or a filtration treatment system. There it is. But it's tested, it's treated. Honestly, I think the most surprising part about this was Rock Creek not having any detect in their well. It doesn't make any sense, and groundwater is a wild system. I've kind of learned. I mean, Springbrook being high is not terribly surprising. Rock Creek having no detect was pretty, and that's one that I'm actually fairly confident about because I had to pull that straight from the pressure tank. So it's, again, it's everywhere, but there's really no rhyme or reason. I'm sure there is a rhyme or reason if we really, really got into the nitty gritty of it, but I am not a hydrologist. All right. On for the PFAS?
Yeah.
So
I'm wondering about nitrates.
I don't think so. I think that's a lot harder. I know for the PFAS and PFOA testing, they're really worried about false positives. And so there's actually it's like a process when you're out testing, you get 4 bottles and you have 1 bottle that's filled with water that they know doesn't have any PFAS in it. And when you're at the site, you take the bottle with the known control, you put it into another bottle that's a known control, and then you set it aside and do your sampling business. And then if it flags for PFAS or PFOA, if it flags above the quantifiable limit, because they have this kind of gray zone in there in their testing where it's above their limit of detection, but it's below what they can confidently quantify. So they're saying it's there, but we're not 100% sure on the value, on the concentration. If you're in that gray zone, they don't run the field blank. If you're above that gray zone, though, if you're above the quantifiable limit, they'll run the field blank to make sure it wasn't like something on my hands, my jacket, something like that, because it's everywhere. I mean, when I was doing the sampling myself, it was January, so I had a jacket, and that was a particularly cold time, but I would take my jacket off and kind of throw it off to the side because my jacket has waterproofing on it. Yeah, so you have to be pretty careful when you're doing it. But of the sites that ran the field, that they did have to run the field blanks on, they all came up clear. So the PFAS that was found was in the water that I was pulling. With nitrates, it's not anywhere near as likely. I wasn't eating, celery or sausages while sampling. Yeah. I'm sure there are plenty of the town guys. A lot of these were town shops, so I'm sure plenty of the town guys would be like, "Yeah, let's do that." I did not have time for bacon frying in this endeavor, though. But yeah, so that's what just the town halls look like. I'll do something similar once we do have all of the private well samples. I imagine it will look significantly different in all reality. I will be shocked if Rock Creek ends up being blue again. The others being orange and red, not so shocking. So for the next steps on this, we're planning on starting the private well sampling May 22nd. It will likely go all the way through June. We're almost up to 1,000 samples. There's going to be a bunch of us, basically the entirety of Land and Water is going to be out sampling. Myself, the intern, Chase will be out doing some. But we'll likely go through June. I'll be batching folks out here after I get things closed and get the final sheet cleaned up for participants. Kind of contacting folks, letting them know, hey, we're going to come out, pull your sample. Once we do that, I'm planning on sending samples into the lab every week as we're pulling them to try and keep it fresh, so that way the lab can get through them in a timely fashion. I'm hoping to get everything out to the folks who are participating by mid-October, but this is really going to depend on the lab and their timelines. It's 1,000 samples. We have to pull 1,000 samples. They have to analyze 1,000 samples. So we'll see how it goes. But my goal is to get that out by mid-October. And then once all that is said and done, once the invoices are all processed and we have all of that stuff paid and covered, we're going to take a look at the budget and how much funding we have left. And then we can explore options like secondary testing, follow-up testing, trace testing, stuff like that. But that would be kind of towards the very end of this year. And then the sampling would actually happen likely beginning to mid next year.
Question, Mr. Chairman, on that private sampling, do you have to take every private sample, or do you send the kit to the homeowners and they send it back to you, or you have to physically be for every sample?
So we're planning on physically taking every sample. We're not the only county to be doing something like this. And from talking to folks in other counties, there's a very high rate of testing kits that just get thrown into the ether to never be seen again, sort of thing. I mean, I know a lot of folks personally, if I were to call my in-laws up, farmers up north, and say, hey, can I come out and grab some water? They'd be like, go for it. But if I were to send them a kit, they'd be like, off it goes. So in order to minimize the amount of wasted, because you figure if we're going to give them to homeowners, we're going to have to mail, we're going to pay in postage, we're going to have to pay somehow to get them the testing kits. We might as well get some data for it. So we're going to eat the staff time and do that and actually get the data points that we're budgeting for.
Yeah, I would just comment, I think based on my experience as well, and Heather mentioned it, the success rate to give us the best bang for our buck. We prioritize that putting staff time into this to collect a sample is the best that we should be doing. So that's why we're going to go and collect that sample. And like Heather said, I think it would improve our success rate, and for funding this, that's why we're going to do it.
Mr. Chairman. You are talking about secondary sampling, so I suspect I already know the answer to this question, but do we have enough money, given the volume of requests and the not very much money that we were able to give you?
So the secondary testing is something we're going to be fully evaluating after it's all said and done, once the invoices are processed. Right now, so when we were putting this budget together, we put it together assuming that all of the field blanks for the PFAS and the PFOA testing would have to get ran. Simply because if they all did get run and we didn't have the funding for it, what do we do then? But they didn't all get ran because there were some no detects. Even some of the sites that did have detects, they were in that fuzzy range where they didn't have to run the field blank. If the lab has to run the field blank, that's an extra charge. I want to say it's 300-ish a pop for that one, for just the field blank testing. That's why we only did 22 samples in the county for the PFAS. So we have a little bit of money there. We were also budgeting for shipping, mailing, and stuff like that. That has a lot more variability to it. And the shipping so far has actually been coming in a little bit under what we expected, because we were going based off of standard rates for UPS. And we actually, we set up an account with Speedy, who runs out of AirTech. So if you see a county vehicle hanging out at AirTech all summer, I promise we're actually doing county stuff. But they run Speedy out of there. And so that's actually been coming in a lot cheaper than we expected. Yeah. So we're going to see what we have left for, nickels and dimes at the end of the year, and what we can do, if we can do anything meaningful with it from that.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you,
One more
Jason.
question.
Yeah.
At my home farm, I have like a 300-foot irrigation well and a 60-some foot for the cattle in the home. Would it be any benefit to test both of them to check like new water and old water? Because they're saying one time that the old water that's really deep shows a lot less contamination or nitrates and that, or is there be any
It'd be interesting.
benefits?
There's, when you're looking at well depth, and again, I am no hydrologist, and this is speaking in very broad terms. Every well is a little bit different. Every aquifer is a little bit different. But if you've got a well at 60 feet and you've got a well at 300 feet, they're probably pulling from different sources. And a lot of times the further down you go, there's more of, it's a confining layer, which kind of blocks contaminants to some extent. So that's why the older water is typically less. Again, broad patterns. But it could be interesting. And if you'd like to sign up, I still have some space.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just a comment on Gary's sampling of about 10 that I did in our area. All the old wells were high and all the new wells were very low. And I think part of it's casing. But like mine is only 80 some feet and it's high. But that's the way it worked, which is kind of what you just said.
Yeah, to that effect, some work's been done. Particularly Heather gave a presentation to the Planning Commission for Colfax, town of Colfax, almost 2 years ago now.
Something like that.
Yeah, and looking at well construction reports and the depth of casing into the static water level, so below the water table. And this is fairly consistent with our region of the state. If you're in at least 50 to 60 feet of casing into the static water level, your nitrate concentration drops way off. If your casing is closer to the top of the water table or even above it, now you don't have that protection like you would before, from the deeper casing, and your nitrates are going to be higher. So there's some work that was done by DNR on a lot of those town wells. Township wide assessments, and that's some of the results that they're seeing. So yeah, the important thing to keep in mind is when we evaluate results, there are so many variables that affect the condition and the concentration of the water. There's certainly there is a general understanding of sources of nitrate within the state of Wisconsin, but when it comes to a particular site, you need to look at all those variables from specifically well construction, looking at the hydrology, looking at land use, landscape features. Like the Rock Creek well that was pulled for the town. There's a lot of unknowns there that are knowns, but we haven't fully evaluated them yet. And I think time will tell with the private well sampling for the rest of the project. But as far as the PFAS, PFOAs, PFOAS, those are, I guess, like Heather said, it's becoming to be known everywhere in all kinds of different materials. It's in our rivers, it's in our lakes. Just depends on what the concentration is. And that the EPA is now recommending some changes to those health standards, lowering them drastically, like Heather mentioned. And KT is on the call if you have any specific questions about that. But we have been working closely with them, the state DHS office, to make sure that as these results come out, when we start having specific values and more further reporting, to have a narrative to go along with that about sources, where to look, how to interpret the results, what does this actually mean? And a lot of that with this type of contaminant is it's been around a long time, but we're learning more and more every day. So it's there. I think we expected to find it somewhere, but honestly, I wasn't expecting it to see in some areas of our county. But that just goes to show that it's pretty prevalent. So I think with that, unless you have questions for KT or else, we'll probably end it there to keep you on time today.
And if we come to near the end of 2023 and looks like we're going to need additional money, there will be additional ARPA funds at that time that we could go to the board for. So thank you very much for the really good work, Heather and Chase. We'll have to find some way to show our appreciation to our staff I can't even imagine on top of everything else. Hope people are home when they come. Well, Heather is not here yet to talk. Oh, she's here. There you are. Come on. Thanks.
I'm scooting upstairs. I got emails typed up on it.
Good morning, everyone. So this resolution we've discussed this, I guess, and Diane, I was asked to prepare the resolution requesting the state revise the current real estate transfer fee formula. Do you want me to read the resolution? Do you have further questions?
Why don't you read it? Yeah.
Sure. Okay, now therefore be it resolved that the Dunn County Board of Supervisors request the state of Wisconsin to revise the real estate transfer fee share formula to again allow Wisconsin counties to retain 50% of all real estate transfer fees collected, with 50% to be remitted to the state. And be it further resolved that the county clerk is directed to send copies of this resolution to the Dunn County's elected representatives in the Wisconsin Assembly and Senate, to the governor, and to the Wisconsin Counties Association. Offered this 19th day of April 2023, if it moves forward to county board. Yeah, I feel like we've discussed this, but the collection of the transfer fees, it was mandated by the state back in 1969 and included a requirement that the counties remit 50% of the fees to the state. And then in 1981, they changed the transfer fee formula, and then the split was changed to 80% going to the state. And through our office, we assume the annual operating costs of recording all the transfers occurring in the county and including the collection of the transfer fees. And then we remit to the state their share on a monthly basis. I think I've shared numbers in the past, but and of course, 2021 and 2022 were, with the property values being so high, that the shares would have been quite quite large compared to previous years, but I have from 2017 to 2022, we would have stood to retain over $1 million if the share would be the 50-50 split. Now there's at last count, there was 28 counties that have passed resolutions. And so it started, I'm not sure exactly which county, maybe Vernon County started with the resolution and brought it forward to Wisconsin counties and the Wisconsin Counties Association, and they have since included it in their legislative agenda. And you know, I know not all counties in the state are for this, because of course they feel maybe if this share is, you know, if this split is changed, maybe there'll just be less money elsewhere. So there is a concern by some counties in that regard, but the Wisconsin Counties Association is moving forward with this, and so, yeah, it's your decision, I guess, whether we move forward with the resolution or.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. Any comments or questions? Anyone care to make a motion to support this?
I will move that we approve this resolution on behalf of the Register of
Mr.
Deeds.
Morehouse, okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Barrier? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. No, not anybody opposed?
No.
Thank you for doing
Thanks.
this. Okay, so we're at Mr. Carlson's item regarding the proposed amendments to chapter 16. You guys don't have to stay for this. I don't think if you want to take off.
We're implicated in it, so I'll be
Okay,
here.
all right, okay. Okay. So I think, Tom, your suggestion is that we try and plow through it and see how far we get.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
I'm agreeable to that. We'll see how it goes. Okay.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So about a year ago, we adopted our current county land division ordinance. Myself, Chase, and we've had about a year now to see what things are working really well, what things perhaps need some improvements, and some things that can perhaps go by the wayside, and other things that we may want to add that were initially an oversight. So the ordinance is good. I don't want the committee to get the impression that we're starting over from scratch, but we feel that with the proposed amendments, will only make the ordinance that much better. Before I get too far along, the committee all received some comments from Mr. Christopherson, chair for the town of Elk Mound, and I'd be happy to go through those, but I guess that, that's at the purview of the committee. My intention this morning is to just start at line 1 and go through the ordinance, unless the chair has any other recommendations or ideas.
I think we all got copies of the comments. And so, if we can, I think we're aware of them. So let's see if there are points where they are relevant to the discussion. You could point those out to us. That'd be helpful.
I will try. It's a large document. So if I get past, feel free to interrupt me. I suspect most of these will get covered during my presentation. If not, we can certainly circle back around and make sure we get to all of them. So let's just start. In your packet, you found an explanation corresponding to the line number. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to read that. And again, please stop me as we're going through this. So before I start, you're going to think that, geez, there's a lot of information in here, but I really see it as a couple main areas. The environmentally sensitive areas we spent quite a bit of time on, lot standards and access. Those are kind of the big 3, if you will. And of course, there's other things. So I guess don't let it overwhelm you. It looks like a lot. So I'm just going to kind of skip through the table of contents here. These are just general. Let me grab my notes. So if we get down on line 32. And some of this is gonna go very quick. So we added another purpose statement to provide for proper ingress and egress. I don't think there's gonna be much discussion on that. Line 36, we also defined access easement. Right now, we really need to differentiate between public roads, private roads, and access easements. So added a definition for that. Archaeological site. So down in our environmentally sensitive areas, we have identified Indian mounds or burial mounds. And in doing some research, we thought perhaps we could come up with a more politically correct term. So we were able to find in state statute, they define archaeological site, which includes Indian mounds, burial units and things, but also a whole host of other things. So we jumped on that and put archaeological site in here. We're actually defining that, and then that will show up later as a component of our environmentally sensitive areas. Contiguous buildable area. Staff are looking at doing away with that. It's creating some problems, not only for staff, but also for the general public. Some of the variance requests that have come before this committee, not all, but some, I would say most of them, had to do with the CBA requirement. We'll get into an alternative for that. It's not really going away. It's just we're going to choose to, if the amendments go through, we're going to be managing it more at a staff level than having it come before the committee. So it's still important, and how we're managing it is going to be changing under the proposed amendments. And again, these are proposed amendments. This, we need your support on this, but right now this is what staff are advocating for. Lot 66, you're going to see a lot of just minor formatting changes. That's appearing there. Line 85, environmentally sensitive areas. So we're proposing some changes in here. Line 87 is just going to be simply wetlands. We're not going to include a 75-foot buffer. Item B is lands within 75 feet of wetlands. So does everybody understand that? We're not lumping them together, but so we're considering wetlands as being important, and then land within 75 feet of them. And it was hard to put the two terms together, so that's why they are separated. We actually found that verbiage in another county's ordinance, and it seemed to fit well. So we're not calling it a buffer, but we're saying those lands within 75 feet are considered to be sensitive. Buffer has somewhat has its own connotation, right? It means that something is restricted within that area. So the new item C is going to remain. It was the old item B. Item D is going to remain. C is going to remain. Item E is moved down to G now. So we're striking E, and we're going to adopt archaeological sites, which we just went through the definition. And then item F, perennial and intermittent streams. We are striking springs and other drainage ways that contain running water during spring runoff or storm events, including a 25-foot buffer. Springs can crop up, they can dry up, they can, appear and disappear. Drainage ways, I know the surveyors are very concerned about that statement. They're doing a project in the middle of summer. And how do they know if there's going to be spring runoff there? They're certainly not going to come back in the spring and check for that. So we're trying to determine risk versus reward for some of this stuff. And we just feel springs, drainage ways, storm events carrying running water or drainage ways carrying runoff during storm events, including the 25-foot buffer, are just things that we don't want to include in the definition, but we still are including perennial and intermittent streams. So there's a lot there. Any questions on these environmentally sensitive areas and why we're proposing this?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
It's good explanation earlier and just now on why you're proposing it. Do you see any real difference in protecting environmentally sensitive areas with the new language compared to the old?
Well, the old or the current right now is we have a 75-foot building setback line from wetlands. That's going to be going away with these amendments. So somebody would be allowed to build right up to a wetland, and according to zoning regulations, there's nothing that would prohibit that. I mean, zoning certainly looks at wetland areas, mapped wetlands. And I don't want to speak for Ann, but as far as I'm aware, other than the land division ordinance preventing a building within 75 feet of a wetland, that standard doesn't exist in any of our other Dunn County ordinances. So we would, in effect, be regulating land use in the land division ordinance, what you can do within a buffered area from a wetland. So that's one thing that's going to be changing. And with environmentally sensitive areas with respect to contiguous buildable area, right? The two go hand in hand, because CBA refers back to ESAs. I hope everybody's, on board with these acronyms now. So, and I don't want to jump the gun, but when somebody comes in proposing a new lot, staff are going to look at it and make sure. So and as we get back, you will see, if any newly created lots contain environmentally sensitive areas, then we're going to take a hard look at that and make sure, do you have enough room on this proposed lot to get your residential structures in there, any outbuildings, a well, a septic, a replacement area for your septic. And if staff feel that the proposal is going to be marginal, in other words, hey, we've got a lot of ESAs on here, we may require a soil boring, and you're going to have to design this lot to our satisfaction before it's going to move forward with an approval. Instead of coming to this committee, the applicant paying a $200 variance request because they can't meet a 30,000 square foot number, a threshold. It's still going to be managed, but staff are going to handle that. So, and we're going to look at these things, these environmentally sensitive areas, as part of that review. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. We'll see more as we go along too, but I wanted
Yes.
to ask it here.
Mm-hmm.
I would kind of a follow-up to that, Tom. If, so is it staff's opinion that removing the 75-foot setback for buildings from wetlands does not pose an environmental problem? Or is it that should be moved to a zoning issue?
I'm going to stop short in saying it does not pose an environmental problem, because I guess that's subjective. But I will follow up. If the committee feels that that's an important consideration, then I think the concept or the provision needs to reside in a zoning or perhaps a standalone wetland ordinance. It's not the right place for it.
Mr. Chairman, question for Tom. You're saying that staff would take care of a lot of these stuff, but say if the staff said no to a proposed lot, would the applicant have a chance to say, hey, I want to go right to the committee to see if I can get some results there?
We have a section in our ordinance, they would have a right to appeal the decision of the department, and there's a whole set of procedures for that.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
to your point, Supervisor Bjork, when the committee is taking action on a lot of these requests, staff are providing a recommendation to you at that point. I just want to put you at ease that, staff are, we are going to take things very seriously and look at things, and we're just trying to keep the process more streamlined and get to the end result for the landowner and applicant without having them jump through more hoops than is perhaps necessary and paying extra fees to do that. It's an alternative to the way we've been conducting business for the past year. And I think end result is we're still going to be holding with the principles of the ordinance, and just placing more of that trust in staff. Okay, I'm going to keep moving then.
Sure.
So we'll jump down to line 109. So high value agricultural land, I suspect there may be some discussion on this. This is tied in directly with section 16.10 of the ordinance. So I'm not going to read these definitions. Everybody's had a chance to do that, but we're proposing to define exactly what is high value ag land. And there's going to be two components of that. I'm going to jump down to section 16.10 because it's directly related to that. and it will help our discussion. So here's 1610, line 315. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but staff, based on the definitions, the definition that we came up with, we feel that line 319 can be struck because that is in the definition. And then all of subset or sub 2 here, starting on line 325, can be struck as well. And this was in a lot of conjunction and not cooperation, but conjunction and consultation with our county conservationist. So again, we are trying to take the subjectivity out of determining what is high value ag land and actually defining it. So I don't know what more I can add to this. I suspect we may have some questions, maybe not. But I guess now's the time to discuss this. If there's any strong opinions, or maybe Chase would like
Chase,
to add something.
Feel free to comment.
Yeah, so Tom referenced consultation with me and our review on this, and that line 325 through 328, where consultation with myself, NRCS, while it's important, and I certainly appreciate having my opinion as being valued, it's still I think it's in an uncomfortable situation sometimes to try to apply what is considered high value ag land without some sort of sideboard or some guidance. So if I was to be asked that question today and potentially in the future, I'm going to reference Web Soil Survey for, Dunn County Soil Survey for land capability classifications. We're going to reference our farmland preservation plan that identifies high prime farmland. And those are two scientifically driven, what are the conditions of the soil and the condition of the land that would provide for high value ag land in that sense. The uncomfortable part is the different opinions on what is considered high value land above and beyond what the soil and the land can provide. And that is, if it's irrigated, it may provide a different value. If the surrounding land use is being marketed and real estate is at a different value than what this particular piece of property might be, that's subjective to, to all sorts of different outside forces. So I think part of this is identifying how we're going to determine high value ag land through the revision of the definition, and then removing that subjectivity from, it could be me one day and somebody else the next day, they may have a different opinion of it. So that's part of the reasoning behind it.
Question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
So Chase, when we're saying high value ag land, does that mean high value as good agricultural soil or high value economically?
I think the way I interpreted the existing ordinance is putting my conservationist hat on, not my economist hat. Mm-hmm. And I'm not an economist, I am a conservationist. So if my position is being referenced in here, I took that as meaning land capability classification. And that's where the uncomfortability, me being uncomfortable personally of trying to provide guidance to this committee in a decision on anything outside or beyond that. So that's where we're trying to simplify that. If that is not the goal of this statement in the ordinance, then we may want to discuss that further about the economics behind it.
Thank you.
Okay, I will move on. Line 117, improvement in the original ordinance was out of order. It was before high water elevation. It should be after high water elevation. So just a format or a vertical move with that term. Lot 119 is just some minor formatting changes. Line 140 is outlot, and this was one of the items on Mr. Christofferson's comments that he had made. So outlot, we're proposing to remove private right of way, private road or alley. Our ordinance later on actually says outlots or private roads cannot be designated as outlots. So it was just an oversight. These terms should not have been in the definition. right now, our current version that we're using does not require outlots to have access. They don't have to have frontage on a public road, private road, or on an access easement. And we thought that putting this statement in here, I've been asked questions this past year. Surveyors are trying to create an outlot and they're asking me, do I have to provide access that's going to an adjoining landowner? It's like, no, the ordinance is silent on that. And because of its silence, or outlots are not required to have access. I'm going to show you some examples. I threw some of these together this morning. Just so everybody's kind of clear on what we're talking about here. So these are some certified survey maps that have been recorded various points in time. So you can see there's an outlot on here and a lot, right? And if we jump down to the next page, this is the outlot in red. So if you can see my hand on the screen here, this is a lot on a CSM, and then this large lot right here. So the red parcel plus the land under it was a lawfully created lot. For whatever reason, the adjoiner to the north here wanted this land. Either he wanted it or this landowner down here thought he had too much land. It was unmanageable. Either way, they were splitting a certified survey map, creating this parcel to go to the adjoiner here that had, let's just say, 30 some acres. We can't call this red parcel a lot because it doesn't have access. Our ordinance clearly says all newly created lots have to have access, either on a public road, a private road, or on an access easement, 33 feet of frontage minimum. So the only other option was to call this an outlot, doesn't have access, right? If I own the land around it, I'm going to get a separate tax bill on that. There is really no problem creating the outlot as a landlocked parcel as long as I own it. But if for some reason I just quit paying taxes on this red parcel, this outlot, it's going to end up eventually coming back and Nick's going to have to deal with it. At that point, I would say it's likely, although it's not 100% guaranteed, but it's likely that one of the adjoining landowners is probably going to bid on that and pick it up. The other option is we require an access easement into that. So I own the land around it. And now let's just say Chase owns this parcel here. He's going to, before he can deed that to me, he's going to have to run an access easement across his property to it. That's the other option. And if I'm buying that, you know, I'm probably never going to use the access easement. I'm going to get to it from the rest of my property. That's one example. Here's another outlot that was created. Again, it has no access. We have a water boundary on one side of it. Here's that outlot with an air photo laid underneath it. So what happened with this outlot is, you see where my hand is here. This small parcel is an existing certified survey map lot. Somebody had wanted to purchase the land across the creek for hunting, recreation, whatever. So again, the red parcel, the outlot doesn't have frontage on a town road, but it was going to an adjoiner. And, you know, life is good as long as one person owns all that. But if they quit paying taxes on that, that's when we could have a problem. And I'll give you one more example. I mean, I could provide example after example today, but here's one more example. We have an outlot here. The town road is out here, 510th Street, and we have a 4-acre outlot in the back with no frontage. So here's where this is how it looks on paper. So originally there were 4 10-acre lots carved out of this 40. They're all really long and skinny. The public access point is this town road here. And this lot came up for sale. The new buyer didn't want 10 acres. They only wanted around 6 acres. So the neighbor to the north jumped on that and said, hey, I'd gladly take the woods in the back. So the neighbor to the north purchased this red parcel, which is designated as an outlot on the certified survey map. There is no access to it because the guy is going to come in through his backyard and drive it in here and cut firewood, go deer hunting, whatever he's going to do. If he would ever try and convey that off down the road to a non-adjoiner, now it's an issue. You can't, you know, it's a landlocked parcel. I will point out there is nothing in state law that prohibits someone from conveying a landlocked parcel. Our county ordinance is very clear. All newly created lots have to have frontage, but outlots are not required to. So I'm going to throw this on the screen, and I know Nick is on the call with us as well. He's actually on the phone right now. I have not, I put this together this morning. I have not had a chance to consult with Corp Counsel on this. So this is just for, for whatever it's worth. So let me blow this up.
Can I just ask one question before you start that, Tom? Is there any reason why that person that bought that outlot, the adjoining landowner, that he couldn't come back and ask you, hey, can I combine the two, that outlot and the present lot? I mean, that would take care of the problem in the future.
It would. I think the county needs to be aware that in some cases or under some circumstances, I'm going to go back to this first example here. Okay, so we've got an outlot here that's clearly going to the neighbor. So this is all unplatted lands right now. See where my hand is going around here? Let's just say it's 30 some acres. If the county had a provision in the ordinance that said, this parcel needs to be combined, this remnant now needs to be combined with the land that it's going to, there's a lot of things that come into play. This could cost, certainly it's going to introduce cost to the project because now the boundaries of this parcel have to be established. And in this particular one, they're 40 lines. So that would require a complete section breakdown. The gentleman that owns this may have a mortgage. Well, that's going to entail more paperwork because his mortgage is tied to a legal description. Now he's changing that legal description. If he does he would have to do a certified survey map to combine this red outlot with the rest of his land. So there are some other perhaps unintended consequences with requiring somebody to combine it with the rest of their property. That would be a great idea, and that would, nip this problem from ever having a landlocked parcel there. But I think we need to be cognizant of some of the other unforeseen circumstances with requiring people to combine this with the land that it's going with. Does that answer your question? So it could, all of these could be combined. This CSM lot here in yellow could be combined with the red outlot. Same thing here. This gentleman could take his lot one of his CSM and combine it with this on a 2-lot certified survey map. Could have been done. The problem, and I guess another problem that I see is, and we've had some of these around the county, this red parcel right now is owned by, let's say, Chase, and then I own the parcel around it. If we come in and do a certified survey map combining a piece of Chase's land with a piece of mine, we have dual ownership on the new parcel. Right? When that CSM gets recorded, we're going to have lot 3 of a certified survey map. Chase is going to own 20% of it. I'm going to own 80% of it until he gives me a quitclaim deed for any interest he has in that lot. And we've had some in the county that have stalled out. Lots were created, they're recorded, new PIN numbers are generated, new tax bills are generated, and the parties, for whatever reason, couldn't agree on a price or what have you. And one of them just refused to give a quitclaim deed for any of their interests. So we have joint ownership interest on a handful of parcels around the county. That creates for a messy situation. So that's another
Aren't there ways to solve that by just you're going to require that before the division be permitted, that those issues have to be resolved. That has to be.
We do have a provision in our ordinance that we're going to be coming up to here shortly that says with situations like this, we are requiring an ownership certificate to be placed on the final recorded certified survey map stating that all owners are consenting to the surveying, dividing, and mapping as shown on the certified survey map. So that is our attempt, I guess, and that's currently in the ordinance now. We're just proposing some minor changes to that verbiage.
Tom, one more. So what would be the big negatives of saying that all outlots would have to have an access, either like a private access that would go with that outlot, or that it would connect to a public road?
Well,
what's the big problem there?
The problem is it would encumber this lot, number one. If they put in an easement, by definition, an easement is right to use somebody else's property for a specific purpose. So I can't, if I own the yellow parcel around it, I can't just put an easement in here to that out. I can't have an easement over my own property to get to another piece of property that I own. If this was ever sold off independently to someone, I could create an easement and convey the red parcel with an easement across my property. Or when,
I'm talking about the original.
Yep.
We can sell that a lot.
so an easement would,
Have to, get an easement.
yep. And that would be possible. I do have some language here that, again, I whipped up this morning. It hasn't been vetted with Corp Counsel. So I apologize, Nick, but I just thought I'll get something on paper this morning that we can at least consider. So currently, this is our current verbiage. All lots shall have a minimum of 33 feet of frontage directly on a public or private road or access easement. We're proposing to add in their outlets are not required to have frontage. By being silent, that's what our ordinance says, but we thought let's just be very clear and put this statement in so there's no question, right? So I'm looking at some alternate verbiage here. What if perhaps we removed the last blue underlined sentence and just left it as all lots and then add in outlots? So all lots and outlots shall have a minimum of 33 feet of frontage, right? That would address some of the questions that have been brought up this morning. And then in green, let me blow this up. And again, I pulled this up this morning. It's not in final form. It's just for discussion. Any proposed, so again, all lots and outlots need to have frontage, right? So then if we go on and add in any proposed outlot that is intended to be conveyed to an adjoining landowner shall be exempt from this provision and will require the following note to be placed on the face of the certified survey map or plat. Outlot, and then insert the number, is intended to be conveyed to an adjoining landowner. Any future independent conveyance of said outlot to a non-adjoining landowner shall include an access easement as part of the conveyance. And I thought perhaps that would address this situation. So if we just, let's go back to the first, so applying this verbiage to this situation, this outlot would have to have, so if we go back up, so the recordable document here, right? They're creating this outlot. It doesn't have access or frontage. So if we look at the provision I'm just threw out there, there would have to be a note on here stating that this outlot is intended to be conveyed to an adjoining landowner. If it is ever going to be conveyed independently to a non-adjoiner, then a provision for an access easement will have to be included in that conveyance. That way, if somebody did convey this off without an easement, they would be in violation of our ordinance, but we would not require them to provide an easement up front because the intent is it's going to a neighbor. It doesn't need access. The problem comes up upon its independent conveyance. Now it doesn't have any access. It's not going to it's going to a non-adjoiner, which creates a problem. So again, we'll go back to that verbiage. I don't know if this is something the committee, wants to consider or feels strongly about. Or perhaps the committee thinks outlots with no access is not a problem. But it is something we should talk about, and it was brought up by the town of Elk Mound.
To me, that looks like a good solution to other people have thoughts.
I haven't given it a ton of time, and I certainly want to run it past Corp Counsel. Because this is the first time he's laid eyes on it as well. And I didn't want, my goal was not to blindside anybody, but I just thought it might be efficient for the conversation this morning to get something at least on paper, a start. If you'd like to consider that.
I think this is making sense. I want to walk through a scenario, make sure I'm understanding this. Okay, so an outlot is created and it's landlocked, and that's fine because it's intended to go with an adjoining property. So let's say that new property owner of the outlot, they stop paying their taxes and then it comes to the county. What happens then?
I will let Nick speak on that. Nick?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Okay. So, we have an outlot that's created and it doesn't have an access easement, and that is fine because it's, intended to go along with an adjoining property. I'm wondering what happens in this scenario where that new property owner of the outlot stops paying their taxes and then it comes to the county. What is the next step then?
Well, we would not have authority to stick an easement anywhere to access it. And so it would, the appeal for the lot would only, or the outlot would only be to adjoining landowners to, increase the size of their land holding. There is there's a kind of a general rule that frowns upon selling landlocked parcels. I mean, they're not, it's not a perfect, solution, but in the end, we would end up with a parcel that, unless we were able to buy it or able to create a way to get to it, it would have less value to most people other than adjoining landowners. One of the ways I suppose we could handle it is requiring, that opens another can of worms, requiring adjoining landowners to merge parcels in order to prevent that from happening.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I mean, we could perhaps stipulate in the sale of that foreclosed property that the purchaser must demonstrate that they have acquired an access easement. So we wouldn't be responsible for doing it, but anyone who wanted to buy it would be responsible for negotiating that with.
Yeah, and that's something that we would generally do, identifying any sort of potential problems with the property and making sure that the purchaser knows that they're responsible for solving them. I mean, the other alternative is for the county to, purchase an easement or create a private road, and then sell the property, and include that as part of the purchase value.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Tom C. Do you run into problems, or have you actually run into problems where we've had trouble? The outlaws have really caused a problem for you working or for the county taking it over?
Personally, I have not. I'm sure there's some out there and there perhaps will be some going forward, but usually, like I say, these go to an adjoining landowner. The people are responsible. They pay the tax. I mean, they wanted the land. There was a consideration. They paid money to get it, and anything is possible. Somebody runs into financial trouble and they just quit paying. I'll admit it, it's convenient. Hey, that 5 acres has its own parcel. I'm not going to lose my house if I quit paying taxes on it. Let's just dump it.
I don't think it's a very frequent occurrence. I think it's relatively rare, to be honest, where we see situations like this is where someone has a long, narrow outlot that's meant to be used as a driveway. And they figure, well, if I don't pay taxes on the outlot, who's going to stop me from driving on there? And then the other one is where the county highway department comes through and turns a 15-mile-an-hour corner into a 30-mile-an-hour corner, so flattens the curve a little bit. And then the farmer on the inside of the curve loses about a quarter of an acre, and the farm and a separate lot is created on the outside of the curve that belongs to, the landowner on the inside of the curve, and they quit paying the taxes on that, 0.17 acres, because they can't do anything with it. The tractor and the plow actually are bigger than the parcel. And when we get those, we ask the adjoining landowner on the other, on the outside of the curve, will you take this property? We'll, give it to you. But a situation like this, especially like with a lot that size, we don't see people abandoning those. Usually it's a signal of, usually it would come in conjunction with a greater financial difficulty where, you know, it isn't just the outlot, the landlocked outlot that is sacrificed in order to help. You know, usually it's a bigger situation and people are able to come back in and take care of their obligations. And, you know, we try really, really hard not to take valuable property and give people a chance to try to buy it back. And you know, for the costs that the county has into it in order to, you know, keep the property on the tax roll with a minimum of cost and staff work.
So as a follow-up, the worst case scenario is that the county takes it over and we don't get taxes on it.
Correct.
Thank you.
But we would continue to try to market it, you know, for, I would say, it seems to me this could possibly come up because I actually have seen a couple of instances of this where there's a conveyance, let's say, of the unplatted lands, and the person who does it or the attorney who does it or the real estate specialist who does it forgets to include the outlot in the conveyance. And so then, you know, 2 years later, they come back and say, oh, we completely forgot that. And we'll work with them to try to get it, you know, try to get a corrective conveyance document recorded to show what should have been corrected, or what should have been included as the legal description. Anything to keep it on the tax roll. I think in the past, we've owned tiny little spots where somebody's garden shed in a subdivision, and we got it because the bank that foreclosed on the property forgot to include it in the description of the real estate being foreclosed on. And so the new owners thought they owned it, but they didn't get a bill for it because it didn't change hands officially because the bank forgot to describe it. And so then it went to tax foreclosures. We worked with the adjoining landowner, the person who's supposed to have it, and, you know, and try to get it back to them for, depending on the size, little or nothing, or a reasonable price in order to make things right. You know, past due taxes in a little bit.
Any other questions? Let's move on then, Tom.
Okay, before we go any further, I would like to just revisit my text again. Is this something the committee feels strongly about that you would like to see and perhaps incorporated in the ordinance, or no? The green.
I think it makes sense to me. Yeah, I see some nods, so let's assume that's the case.
Okay, I'll work with Corp Counsel. It may come back in slightly different form, but we'll try and hold those concepts then. Okay. Bear with me, I gotta get back up. Okay, so we left off on line 156. Okay, private road. Currently, we don't have this in our definitions, and I feel really strongly about this. This is one of those terms I think needs to be in here. So we're defining it as an access easement that has been assigned a road name designation by the Dunn County Land Information Office for the purpose of rural addressing. It could also be an existing outlot, because we have some of those on the books already on recorded plats. That is being used for the sole purpose of access, that has been assigned a road name designation by the Dunn County Land Information Office for rural addressing, or it could be a proposed access easement that will be assigned a road name designation for the purpose of rural addressing. Does everybody understand the information in here. When somebody gets too many homes that are accessing what was started out as a driveway, rural addressing becomes a problem. And their addresses just can't simply be off County Road B anymore. They have to be assigned off a street or an avenue. So that's what this is saying. Okay. Gonna move on then to line 181.
Just one question before we move on. Don't we have it someplace, if there's so many accesses or lots on a private road, it's gotta be built to county standards?
We, we are allowing up to 4 lots to be accessed by a private road. Yep. Any more than that, then you're gonna have to turn it over into a town road unless
Okay.
the local jurisdiction, local municipality, in other words, has adopted an ordinance allowing for private roads, then they can remain. But typically, if a town is gonna accept a proposed road for dedication, it has to be built to their standards, or otherwise they would be foolish, for agreeing to accept it. Otherwise, at that point, they'd be on the hook then for building it.
So this is more of a town issue than a county issue? For that, more than like 4
Yes.
lots on a private road?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, we're gonna get into that a lot more here in another section of the ordinance.
okay, thank you.
Street and private road section. Good question. So line 181, we're just simply replacing lots here, or lot with parcels. Just made a few minor changes here to make the language a little more clear and strong. Line 183, Department of Commerce has been replaced with the Department of Safety and Professional Services. Structure. This is an item that was brought up by Mr. Christofferson. His comments said that his perception of a structure would not include personal property that may have been designated as transportable or as a vehicle, but stand in a seasonal or permanent location for storage or intermittent human habitation. Such incidental structures may include, but are not limited to, truck boxes or semi-trailers, truck campers, travel trailers, buses, or motorhomes. Structure shows up quite a few times in the ordinance, and we currently don't have it defined. So I started looking at other counties' ordinance. I consulted with Ann as well. The current zoning ordinance does define structure. But in speaking with Ann and looking at other county ordinances, we settled on this definition. It is very inclusive of a lot of different things. So you've all had a chance to read this. This is what we're proposing. And I don't know if there's any strong opinions on the items that are in here from the committee, but now would be a good time to discuss it if there are.
Yeah, question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
You mentioned that you discussed this with Ann and that there's a definition in the zoning. This isn't the definition in the zoning though, right? So would zoning need to be changed to match it? Or is that the plan, or just curious?
So I think that the zoning ordinance would need to be updated as well, just to make this a little more clear. One thing to keep in mind is that some of the DNR model ordinances allude to things like this, the travel trailers, campers, things like that. I think about it, if I were a landowner and someone wanted to park their camper next to my property and they didn't have to follow setbacks or weren't considered a structure, they could park it right up to that line. Not sure I would be too favorable for that, but I think we've talked in the past too that DNR considers some of these campers and RVs as structures, so they have to follow setbacks like the 75 feet from the ordinary high, things like that. I think this just clears it up a little bit. But yes, to answer your question, zoning would need an update as well.
Okay, I kind of like it, but I'm aware of, it says personal property that may have been designed as transportable or as a vehicle. I am aware of individuals that will modify something that was originally designed and make it almost permanent. So I like putting these things in. And when you said I own property and somebody next to me does this, yeah, that made it hit home a little more too. So I'm fine with this.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on. Line 218 is wetlands. So we are redefining this slightly differently. So those areas either identified as a wetland by a certified wetland delineator or designated on the DNR surface water data viewer as mapped wetlands. It sounds very similar to what we currently have, but the one part that we're striking from this as wetland indicators and soils. That is a separate layer on the surface water data viewer that is different than mapped wetlands. And when we start looking at areas of the county, typically when you have a mapped wetland, there's also hydric soils and wetland indicators nearby. But what we're finding is that there's a lot of areas of the county that have hydric soils. In other words, wetland indicators and soils that aren't actually mapped wetlands. And it's creating some confusion, I guess, with the local surveyors, the engineers, and the general public. When they go on the DNR's website and look at their property, they're not seeing any mapped wetlands, but we're telling them they can't do anything with their property because there's hydric soils there. And we're not currently regulating hydric soils in any other county ordinance that I'm aware of. So we thought, let's redefine wetlands and just define them as what everybody has come to know that they are. They're either on the surface water data viewer, DNR's website as a mapped wetland, or somebody has a wetland, they hire somebody and come out and have their property delineated. So any questions on that? This is a component of our environmentally sensitive areas, and that is something we look at when somebody's trying to create a new lot. If they have wetlands in the property, we're going to give it an extra hard look. Okay, so line 271. So we're removing combinations from this provision of the ordinance. Combinations are, because we're dealing with creating additional non-conformity. Well, if we're combining parcels, we're only making the conformity better. We're improving the non-conformity. So this section is just simply reconfigurations. And then outlots, there is no minimum lot size on an outlot, so that term doesn't really even need to be in here. And then we're removing the part about the 20,000. We have a lot of small parcels that are under 20,000 square feet. I know when Bob Colson was here at the time, when this ordinance was being drafted, I know he had a hand in this, the last part of this sentence. And I believe it may have had something to do with the shoreland overlay district with a minimum parcel size of 20,000 square feet if it's not served by public sanitary sewer. So in talking with Ann on this, we decided the changes here are warranted. And then line 274 is a brand new provision. Something I found in another county's ordinance that just really makes sense. Any parcels being combined need to be contiguous, which is a no-brainer in the same municipality and under identical ownership. So any questions up to this point? We'll jump down to line 319. And this section 1610, we already covered, I believe, earlier this morning in our definition of high value ag land. So I'm going to keep moving unless there's any reason to stop. And we'll jump down the line 401. So this is just some minor formatting changes, which you're going to see more of. Line 408. We just added other applicable county ordinances, which was kind of an oversight. Line 416 is just a cross-reference that we needed to update based on changes that we made. Line 431. More minor formatting changes. Line 437, we added the word outlot in here. No existing structures on a proposed lot or outlot. This must be stated. Line 440. So just for some perspective here, these are items that are required to be shown on a certified survey map, so we don't lose track of exactly where we're at. So line 440, they're still gonna have to show wetlands, but we're removing the 75-foot building setback line and areas of slopes 20% or greater. So again, I know we talked about this earlier, but any building setback lines should really be regulated in the zoning ordinance. And staff feel that steep slopes are not necessary to be shown on the face of the certified survey maps. Some of them that we've gotten in the past year have been very busy. Maps are very complicated. 80% of the new parcel they're creating is 20% slopes, and it just, is it really necessary to show that information? We can still pull that up at any time with the information we have, and it will be part of our review, but showing it on the final document, we don't feel is necessary. Line 442, and I have this flagged as a comment that was also made by or one of the comments we received from Mr. Christofferson. So line 442, location of existing ponds, perennial intermittent streams. We're also going to add in 75-foot offset line from the ordinary high water mark of all navigable streams and lakes. And that's something that's tied in with our zoning ordinance. I will read Mr. Christofferson's comment. The definition of navigable waters in Dunn County Chapter 16 refers to Chapter 30 Wisconsin statutes. Chapter 30 of statutes states navigable waters or navigable waterway means any body of water which is navigable under the laws of the state. I have concerns with a common definition of navigable stream that includes floating a duck or a canoe. My road ditch will do both during certain times of the year. I'm not sure how to respond to that. I just know that we're referring back to Chapter 30 of statutes when it comes to navigability. And I don't know what else we would do at that point, exclude certain portions of that. And perhaps Corp Counsel wants to chime in on this, but unless there's any, maybe the committee has some questions, otherwise.
Supervisor Burr.
It seems like we got this like waters of the United States, and that has been up and down and changed of what is navigable and what is not, you know. By the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, by like the EPA or whatever. But I remember here when we were doing this ordinance, there were some people that were just like giddy because they were saying that even a county ditch could be considered a navigable waterway because, and once they found out that the ditches would have to be regulated, then they changed their mind quite a bit. But they were, you know, so happy that everything's going to be regulated. But then once they found out that how much was going to be regulated, that they really kind of had a different opinion. But it seemed like there's, every time you get a new president, there's a different ruling on what's like the waters of the United States and what's navigable. So I don't think there's really a solid, good definition. I mean, navigable, you think at least a small boat could be used on a pretty regular basis, not just after heavy rain or spring melt. So, unless you can tell me a better definition or what's.
Maybe Chase could kind of respond a little bit to context.
Sure. I guess it goes back to the public trust doctrine for the state of Wisconsin and identifying public waterways within the state. And there's some navigability definitions in there. And that's what a lot of the statutes and administrative codes in the state of Wisconsin are based off of. So while it's not as definitive as maybe we would like it to be, there is a definition for navigability within the state of Wisconsin, and that's applied to down to the local level. But certainly it's up for to the individual to make that call of what is considered navigability. It has to do with, is there a bed and bank? There's also, following the public trust doctrine, the ability to float a canoe or a skiff or whatever. There's certain wording that I don't have that in front of me right now, but I would say in general, for the state of Wisconsin, we do have a definition for navigability. It's just the implementation and determination that needs to be made for each water course.
Okay,
Okay, thank you, Chase. I'm gonna move on, line 450. So this is being struck, but it's not being removed. It's just being relocated to another portion of the ordinance. What this portion is in effect is a lot standard, right? So we've simply moved that back to a later section of the ordinance under lot standards. So we are keeping it. Line 457. We're just, after consulting with Ann, we just thought that the current note that's required on the recordable document needed some changes just for clarity. So just some minor formatting changes there. Again, we're not removing the note, just reworking it. One portion though of this provision is being removed, and that's the requirement for placing the 1,000-foot offset or 300-foot offset line. So this has to do with shoreland zoning. And anytime a portion of a newly created lot or outlot is within those areas, the corresponding offset line, we're currently requiring that to be shown. And we're looking at removing that. When shoreland zoning comes into play, county staff are going to be issuing permits for that lot or outlot, and they are going to be establishing these offset lines at that time, regardless of whether or not they're on a map. So it's just another line on the map that we feel does not need to be there as long as there's a note on the face of the map identifying shoreland zoning as applicable. Any questions on that? Line 468 is just some minor formatting changes. Line 479. And Chairman Quinn, you brought this up earlier about our conversation with the outlots, and so this says any certified survey map containing land that is part of 2 or more contiguous tracts, the title of which is held by different owners, shall contain a duly notarized owner certificate executed by all owners of each contiguous tract. The certificate shall state that the owners consent to the surveying, dividing, and mapping of the parcels as shown on the map. We added this verbiage, certainly for clarity. The original intent of this provision was to ensure that all owners involved in a conveyance of land between adjoiners were consenting. Under our current verbiage, a land division on part of a contiguous tract owned by, for instance, a husband and a wife, or tenants in common, joint tenants, an LLC or a trust, would require all owners of the tract to sign a certificate as part of the approval process. And that's not what our original intent was. If some husband and wife own 40 acres and they're carving 5 acres off so their son can build a house, we never intended for the husband and wife to sign an approval certificate on the CSM. It was only when that husband and wife was acquiring 2 acres from the neighbor, and they were doing a certified survey map to do that and combine it with their current property. So this language, I think, was certainly needed and better clarifies this provision. Any questions? Line 483 is just some minor formatting changes. Line 518. We're replacing parcel of land with contiguous tract. If you remember, our contiguous tract definition can be made, contiguous tract as it's defined can be made up of multiple parcels of land that were acquired at different times by different parties. So unintended consequence, we didn't want somebody to take one of their small parcels that was part of their tract and do a CSM on it and create a new parcel. So putting the word contiguous tract in there would eliminate that from happening. Line 563 is a cross reference that just needed to be updated. Line 640. This is just an oversight. So just for some context, these are items that are required on a preliminary plat. So if they have elevations on there, we need to have the vertical datum that they're referencing those elevations to. Line 656. We are rewording this provision to remove the buffers and to refer to them as offset lines. So again, buffer implies, some type of a restriction, something you can't do within that 75-foot area. So we're renaming them to offset lines. And additionally, the contour line that is located 2 feet above the regional floodplain boundary line should be moved to line 673 below. And here. Oh, it's moved here from line 673 below. So 673 down here, we're pulling some of that verbiage out and moving it up to line 656. Sorry, I'm bouncing around so much. So again, these are items required on a preliminary plat. Line 673. So again, I mentioned we moved that up to line 656, and then we're also, the second part of this is the requirement for 10,000 square feet lying above the 2-foot freeboard that we're moving under lot standards. Just makes more sense to have a lot standard listed under the lot standard section. Line 678 is an entirely new provision. It was an oversight. We do have some properties that people are looking at platting. They're doing a preliminary plat and there may be a driveway there, a house already, a well, pouts components. So that information needs to be shown on the preliminary plat. So again, that was just originally an oversight, something we need to add. Line 697, these are final plats, and these are some things that, again, were originally an oversight. If there's regional floodplain located on the property, that has to be shown along with the 2-foot freeboard contour. If there's shoreland zoning, we're going to require a note placed on the plat or CSM. Actually, this is final plat. So on CSMs, we require the note. On subdivision plats, we also need to require the same note. So that was an oversight by not having it in there. Environmentally sensitive areas, we're not requiring all the ESAs be shown on a final plat, but item 5 requires most of them. So you're going to need to show wetlands, ponds, perennial intermittent streams, lakes, rivers, and flowages, 75-foot offset line from the ordinary high water mark. Item 6, you're going to need to show wells, private drives, any pouts components, and then the datum reference for any elevations that may be shown on the plat. So these things were all just original oversights. And then just some renumbering down here based on changes that we made. Line 760. Some minor formatting changes here. Line 768. We've just added in here that all applicable county ordinances, which covers more than just the comprehensive zoning ordinance, floodplain, shoreland overlay areas. Line 791. This was after consultation with Chase. So we're striking the very last sentence under paragraph 2 here. The Land and Water Conservation Division does not provide this type of service or assistance. So that's being struck from the ordinance. Line 871. Streets and roads. So we're retitling this section as streets, public and private roads, and access easements. They need to be clearly differentiated. And then provisions in this section need to be rearranged. Some standards in this section apply to all 3 terms, some only apply to 2, and some only apply to 1. So this is quite a busy section here. Line 880. Language should be moved up from line 923. So that's talking about variance for undue hardship for access easement, which is less than 66 feet in width. So we're just simply relocating that provision from later on, moving it up. And then we also added a section or feel a section or verbiage needs to be added in here for grandfathering in. Um. $880, just bear with me. So that's the second half of this. Any lots, outlots or parcels existing prior to the adoption date of this ordinance that are either accessed by a private road or access easement, which is less than 66 feet, that are either combined or reconfigured so that no new additional parcels are created, shall be exempt from this requirement. So again, we're not creating any new parcels. If somebody just wants to combine or reconfigure, that should be allowed. That was originally an oversight in our ordinance. We need to add, line 885 is a new provision. So if somebody's creating an access easement, no existing or proposed structure shall be permitted within the right of way of that private road or access easement. Line 890, we added public and private roads. Just added that in there for clarity, so it's very clear. Line 894. Public roads and private roads, if permitted, should specifically be added. So private roads, if permitted, what that means is, if a town has adopted an ordinance allowing for private roads in a subdivision plat, that's what that section is addressing. And then access easements are intentionally omitted for this. So just public roads and private roads. Line 899, we added some additional verbiage for clarity. Line 913. So we added some language in here that ties it back to the town. The town is going to have to have an adopted ordinance allowing for lots and outlots to be served by private roads, instead of just choosing not to accept the roads. And I know for a fact that Elk Mound is one of the towns that does have language in their ordinance allowing for private roads, and there may in fact be others as well. Line 918, we're adding access easements to the main header here, private roads and access easements. Line 921, this is an item I have flagged from Mr. Christofferson. No more than 4 lots or outlots or a combination thereof, including lots and outlots in existence prior to the adoption date of this ordinance, may be accessed by a private road or access easement. Mr. Christofferson's comments state, I do not think that outlots should be counted towards the 4-lot limit for access on a private road. This may encourage more use of the line 1101 exemption of not having public access to outlots. So again, he thinks outlots should not be counted towards the number 4 limit on this. From personal experience on certified survey maps, when we have a private road or access easement, I typically don't see outlots being created on certified survey maps. Not to say they couldn't be. Subdivision plats, I think, are more likely to have an outlot on them or several outlots. Typically, they're for stormwater ponds, retention areas, things like that. I guess as we crafted this language, we feel strongly that lots and outlots need to count towards the 4-lot limit.
Question, Mr. Chair. If like a subdivision, if they have some property in common, is that usually an outlot, like a green space or like a water retention pond or something? How is that normally handled?
Yes, good question, Supervisor Bjork. Typically retention ponds and things of that nature, green space, are outlots. We certainly have seen those in the past. And they're usually owned in a equal percentage interest by all the lot owners. So if there's 20 lots, that's a 1/20th ownership interest in that outlot. Reason being is if, one of them, it's a taxation issue. if the original developer owns that and he moves to Arizona, leaves all these lot owners there, just quits paying taxes on the outlet, it creates a problem for the county. So, and actually in our ordinance, any stormwater areas or retention ponds and things, the word it shall be designated as an outlot to be owned in equal percentages. Yes. One thing while we're on this provision, Tony's comments got me thinking, which is a good thing. So I thank him for that. We haven't had any plats come in the last year under the current ordinance. And as I read this, if somebody's doing a plat, and this is originally an oversight, I believe, if somebody came in this afternoon trying to do a 25 lot subdivision plat in the town of Elk Mound, and they were proposing a private road because the town of Elk Mound has a provision in their local ordinance allowing for that. Our county land division ordinance wouldn't allow that. They would have to get a variance because line 921 says, if you take out the blue, which is our current ordinance, no more than 4 lots may be accessed by a private road. So if they were trying to do a 25 lot subdivision, we wouldn't allow it. They would have to do a variance request. And I don't believe that was originally our intention. If you're doing a plat, you're going to serve a whole bunch of lots with a private road. The town is fine with it. I don't want to speak for the committee, but I think as a staff member, that's something, we should be allowing. I'm going to get back here to some comments I threw together this morning, again, without consulting with Corp Counsel. So I apologize, Nick, but I just at least wanted to to get something on paper so we'd have something to discuss this morning. So private roads, this is what's currently before you in our amended document here. I think perhaps we should have the green sentence right here after that. This provision shall not apply to private roads created on plats. It was an oversight, I think, on our part. Certainly wasn't intended to restrict somebody from or prevent somebody from doing a platted subdivision with private roads. And then the other thing is provision B that's in there. So what we're proposing a new B in our draft document. Existing lots and outlots fronting on a private road or access easement that was in existence prior to the adoption date of this ordinance may not be further subdivided if the private road or access easement is currently serving 4 or more lots, outlots, or combination thereof. So if we take a large subdivision plat with a private road in there, and let's just say there's a 5-acre lot somewhere in that subdivision plat, what's to prevent somebody from dividing that lot? I mean, chances are if the town was okay with 20 lots being served, now serving 21 is probably not going to be a problem. So I put another simple sentence in here. This provision shall not apply to lots and outlots fronting on a private platted road or on a platted private road. So that would allow somebody with a large subdivision lot on a private road to further divide that, provided they comply with, minimum lot standards and setbacks and things like that.
Maybe I should have done my homework better, but being busy. But anyhow, we have outlots for like water retention ponds, etc. Now, how about this private road? Is there 1/20th? Is there 20 lots? Is there 1/20th some kind of language that how they're supposed to be maintained? Because we've run into that problem before.
We've addressed that, Supervisor Bjork, in the current ordinance that we adopted last year. Outlots or a private road cannot be designated as an outlot. So the
Okay.
ownership of all those platted lots has to extend out into the private road, subject to an easement for the rest of the lot owners in that development.
Okay.
But that doesn't fix things that have happened in the past. And we have subdivision plats with private roads that are designated as outlots. And typically they are owned in equal percentages.
Okay.
But we don't allow that anymore going forward.
But we don't have any language for how that road is supposed to be maintained. When does they all have to, or we do?
We do in our ordinance, anytime you're serving more than 2 lot or more than two, when 2 or more lots are being served by an access easement or private road, an agreement for the maintenance, repair, and other things has to be submitted with the final documents.
You said I should have done my homework better, but that's
Oh.
one question that comes up.
It's a big ordinance and there's a lot of things buried in it. If you don't know where to look, sometimes you don't think it's in there. Yep, good question.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Tom, does this fit in any way with earlier when you talked about the township having to have a private road ordinance? Does it make any difference whether they have one or not with this?
Yes, because private roads are not allowed. They're only allowed on certified survey maps. That's how we start the language out here. Private roads are allowable, but only on certified survey maps. They are allowed on subdivision plats if the local municipality has adopted an ordinance allowing for them. So let's just say we're in, and I'm gonna just pick on Red Cedar. Let's just say we're in the town of Red Cedar and Red Cedar does not allow private roads. And a developer comes in and wants to do a subdivision plat. They cannot put a private road in there to serve 20 lots. They will be required to build it to town road standards and dedicate it to the town of Red Cedar at that point. And I just throw that out for conversation. I'm not sure on the status of Red Cedar's ordinance, but just as an example, a town would have to have an ordinance allowing for private roads. If they don't, then the county is not going to approve that plat with private roads in there. They will be required to improve the roads, build them to town road standards, and have the town accept the dedication as a public street as part of the county's approval process.
So this last green line here doesn't contradict that?
No,
Okay,
no,
that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
good question.
Anything else? Okay.
Line 923. So this was moved up to line 980, so we're not removing it, we're just relocating it. It talks about a variance from the 66-foot minimum width requirement. Line 925, staff are recommending removing this provision. It would prevent somebody, this provision in essence would prevent somebody from creating a well-designed horseshoe or loop road on a typical 40-acre parcel of land. So if you just picture a 40-acre parcel of land with a town road running down one side, and a developer wants to develop that 40, maximize the number of lots, and not have dead-end cul-de-sacs, which we frown upon, the best option would be to run a horseshoe loop road in there, right? Two access points, 2 exits, 2 entrances. When I take a 40 and do a well-designed horseshoe in there that's gonna reach all 4 corners of that 40, I'm ending up with over 2,000 linear feet of center line. And our ordinance says you can only go up to 1,320 feet. It would in essence prevent or restrict the developer from designing a well-designed or a well-thought-out horseshoe loop type road. So we think that provision just needs to come out of there. Any questions on that? Thought it was a good idea at the time, but the more we think about it, it's just not, doesn't serve the public well. Line 928. This is a new provision that addresses divisions of land fronting on a private road or access easement that was in existence prior to the adoption date of the ordinance with respect to lot count. So not having this provision in there originally was an oversight. Line 931. This is also a new provision that addresses consolidations and reconfigurations fronting on a private road or access easement that again was existing prior to the adoption date of the ordinance with respect to lot count. This again was an oversight. Line 935. This is something that was also on Mr. Christopherson's list. So all private roads designed as permanent dead ends have to meet certain requirements. And again, these are private roads. Such private roads shall terminate with a full 360-degree circular turnaround, having a minimum turnaround right-of-way radius of 75 feet and a minimum finished driving surface radius of 50 feet. So if we go down the line 1002, here we were talking about standards for permanent cul-de-sacs, and that's where these dimensions came from, 75 feet and 50 feet. So I ended up moving that. I guess our staff are proposing that that be moved up here under the permanent dead ends. So again, a cul-de-sac, 75-foot minimum right-of-way radius and a 50-foot minimum finished driving surface radius. So that would be 100 feet of pavement diameter for that turnaround. I will read Mr. Christopherson's comment on this line. I agree that it is important that even private roads are terminated, not simply becoming a driveway. Our fire chief feels that a hammerhead is a termination option that will serve their needs and be less expensive. He will be checking to see if a 50-foot radius is adequate for modern fire trucks. When I spoke with Chris Hahn from the Elk Mound School District, I learned that they do not send buses into cul-de-sacs. I did have an opportunity on Friday to speak with Dustin Binder, our highway commissioner, because I believe these standards came at his direction a couple years ago when we were drafting the current ordinance. And he confirmed that those are accepted standards. Now they can be more than, certainly if somebody wants to do something greater than that, they can. But right now, you know, Dustin doesn't feel that these dimensions are out of line or don't meet the intended purpose. So that's all the information I really have to provide on that. I don't know if the committee has any.
Just one question on that, just so I get straight in my head. When you're talking about a private road, that is like more than the 3-4. I mean, you're not talking about like a private driveway that goes to a farmstead or one home, are you? Yeah, this is the 4 or more?
Correct.
Okay, just so I get it straight there.
Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what a hammerhead is.
No.
It's basically like a T.
So you
So
drive
you
in and
picture a
back up.
hammer and hold it up. The road comes into a dead end and you pull in one side of the T back into the other and drive back out.
So it requires backing up?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. That eliminates a lot of things. Thank you.
I did ask Dustin about hammerheads and he just said the commonly accepted turnaround right now is a cul-de-sac. So I'm not an engineer. I'm not a street superintendent. I don't run a plow truck. I know cul-de-sacs have their own problems and the town chairs that are sitting back here can attest to that. They're a pain in the rear when you're trying to plow snow in the wintertime. Nobody's arguing that. But you know, these
Do we
are
have-
these are minimums. And I guess if the town feels, if a particular town feels very strong that these are too weak, then they certainly can adopt more stringent standards and the developer would have to comply with those more restrictive standards. I apologize, Tom, I
No,
cut
that's
you off.
fine. I was just wondering if you know of any examples of a hammerhead. Could look at.
I can't
recall.
I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some. We really honestly don't see them. I guess partly because we don't
We don't allow
them. Um,
Okay. Sorry about that.
I just know from personal experience, when you drive into Timber Valley, which is a subdivision plat, you know, that went through this committee, that paved driving service is huge. I mean, I could land a helicopter there or an airplane. I mean, it's big. It's a lot of pavement. Yeah. So, I don't know. As far as adequacy of turning around a fire truck or an ambulance, I can't speak to that. I just know that the standards that are in here came from our highway department, highway commissioner. So I trust they're adequate.
Yeah, I'm sure they're adequate. The question is there an alternative that would be less troublesome and expensive and maybe more aesthetically appropriate? Anyway,
Okay. Line 941. So the first portion of this provision, we're moving down to line 964. The second portion of the provision is being moved to line 949. So again, we're not removing the provision, we're just simply relocating it. Line 947, we're adding the word outlots in there for clarity. Line 949. So this was the second portion of line 941 that we moved here, and we've also expanded on the verbiage somewhat. Line 955. We've added verbiage for clarity and revised the provision for maintenance agreements so that are not mandatory for lots or outlots already in existence. This question came up quite often this past year. So if there's an existing access easement with a couple lots on, and now somebody's going to put a few more lots on there, and now we're requiring maintenance agreements where in the past there weren't any, do the previous lot owners or existing lot owners, are they bound to sign those maintenance agreements? And after talking with Corp Counsel and thinking things over, no, we don't believe that existing lot owners should be bound by that agreement. Line 961, this was something I have flagged for Mr. Christofferson again. So staff are proposing to remove this provision. So we've all read it. This is taken verbatim. Well, it's not verbatim, but it was taken from state statute 236.35 sub 1. It's almost verbatim, but not quite. In talking with Nick, we just feel that it's already regulated in state statute, having the language in our land division ordinance would create an additional enforcement obligation on behalf of the county. So let's just remove it. I'll read Mr. Christofferson's comment. Leaving this provision in the ordinance may prevent the highway commissioner and town chairman from getting some nasty phone calls. So,
comment, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Question. I know in our, I'll call it the manure ordinance, we put in standards that were state standards so we could enforce them. Isn't this kind of the same thing? If we left it in, then we could enforce it, or, and rather than go to the state and wait?
correct. Yep. Leaving it in here has no harm, but it does create an enforcement obligation for the county, good or bad. I can certainly see, somebody records a deed and they don't disclose that this is a public road. I guess who's going to find out about it? And if somebody does, then who's going to go out and, enforcement authority, I guess, is kind of a question I have. We can certainly leave it in there. It's just, I don't think it's certainly something I'm not going to be coming in every Monday morning running a check in the Register of Deeds office, do we have any violators last week of this provision? I don't feel strongly either way about it. I guess myself, Corp Counsel, our recommendation is just remove it. It's one of those provisions that we don't see a lot of value in enforcing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Line 964. So a portion of line 941 was moved here. So in line 941, these were kind of like policy statements, right? It was just talking about what these easements are good for. They need to be granted at all times, yada, yada, yada. We're actually moving that down and incorporating that statement or that policy now into a note on the face of the final document. So that verbiage is there. Line 1002, we're looking at deleting this provision. So again, some of this was moved up above in a section that we just talked about. And restricting it to a length just is not a good idea. Again, it prevents a well-designed horseshoe type road. Line 1022, we're just about done, so bear with me here. Didn't take as long as perhaps we had thought. Line 1022, we're introduce or adding the word access in there for clarity. Line 1025 is some minor formatting changes. Line 1049 is a header section, so that should be titled lots and outlots. Line 1050, we're looking at striking this provision, which was also one of Mr. Christopherson's comments and thumbs up, if you will. Thanks us for removing zoning from the land division ordinance. So again, I don't know if there's any questions on this, but this is really a land use issue. We just feel it'd be better. It is addressed currently in the or in the comprehensive zoning ordinance. So for those unzoned towns, they still would be allowed to, if somebody landowner wanted to put 2 or 3 homes on a single certified survey map lot, they would be able to do that in an unzoned town. This provision would prevent them from doing that. We're looking at removing that, leaving that control to the locals, specifically the unzoned towns. Any questions on that? It's significant change. Okay, line 1052. We're adding proposed private roads and access easements to the provision. So this is talking about bisecting a lot. Also add verbiage that addresses lots or outlots that were bisected by private roads or access easements that existed prior to the adoption date of this ordinance. So if somebody created a lot 10 years ago that was bisected by an ordinance and it's a large lot, and now they want to sell a little piece of that off, they shouldn't be in violation of our current ordinance by doing so. And the key word here is existing. They were created prior to the adoption date of the ordinance. So again, this was just more or less an oversight in our original ordinance. Line 1058, the whole lot dimension section here is being quite a few changes in here. So line 1058 is being struck, but it's not being removed. It's just being reworded later on. So we're still keeping in here towns with town zoning. Right now, to my knowledge, we don't have any towns with town zoning, but if we would happen to ever get some or get a town, then this provision would hold. Minimum lot size would be governed under the town ordinance. If you're under county zoning ordinance, then you refer to the counties. If you're under county zoning, you refer to the county zoning ordinance. If you're in a shoreland overlay district, then your county shoreland zoning ordinance requirements in there. And then line or 1067 then is the new line here. So basically all other areas, right? 43,560 square feet, which is 1 acre, and an average minimum lot width of 85 feet. I have some lot standards in my office that deal with various lot configurations, trapezoids, parallelograms, weird shaped lots, lots with arc lines on. So that is going to be kept in my office and be our reference document for determining average lot width. Line 1071 is a new provision that addresses combinations and reconfigurations. This again was originally an oversight. Line 1074, we've added some verbiage in here for clarity. Line 1077 was moved here from line 1058. So it's not a new provision, but it's being relocated. So it applies countywide, where it was before, it only applied in the unzoned towns, which was a terrible oversight. We want that 4:1 depth to width ratio to apply countywide. So having it here on line 1077, it will do that. Any questions on that round? So line 1080.
Could you stop for just a second?
Sure.
There's a lot here. I'm just kind of thinking about it yet. 1067. That sets the minimum lot size countywide. That's a question. Does that set the minimum lot size countywide?
In unzoned towns that are not subject to shoreland zoning, yes.
Okay.
If you're under county zoning, then
Yeah.
in cases you could go down to 10,000 square feet if they're served by municipal sewer. 20,000 if they're not.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I apologize if I'm going through this fast. I've been working on it for the last month or two, and it's fresh in my mind, but I realize you've only seen this for a week. So I apologize if I'm going too fast. And if we need to come back to something, we certainly can do that as well. Line 1080. So corner lots, instead of saying 15 feet wider, we know what the width is. Let's just give them the number, right? 100 feet. Corner lots have to have an average width of at least 100 feet. So we're simplifying that. Line 1084. We're getting rid of the contiguous buildable area requirement, which seems like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, but perhaps the committee would like to keep this figure. I don't know, the 30,000. It's not out of some published manual. It's something staff came up with at the time. It's very subjective. And we can see, and we have seen in the past year with these, numerous variance requests coming in, it doesn't seem to be working as well as we had hoped. So, we're going to be getting, the next few lines here is our attempt, I guess, to replace that. So lines 1086 and 1089. So I'm not going to read through these. It was in your packet, but we're still going to be placing emphasis on environmentally sensitive areas, and staff are going to be ensuring that all new lots have adequate area. So if there are any questions, this is, somewhat of a major change in the ordinance here, which I think will serve the public better, and certainly the surveyors and staff. I mean, staff spend time putting together a report as part of a variance request, and if we could spend that time just meeting with the applicant and trying to help them design a well-planned and thought out piece of property, I think it's time better spent, not only for the public but for staff.
Questions? Okay.
Okay. Line 1101. So this is back to the outlots needing frontage. And I think what I'm hearing from the committee is that you like the verbiage that I had put together this morning. So we're going to have to think about this here. Outlots are not required to have frontage along a public or private road or access easement. I guess that's still true. I'll have to work with Corp Counsel on this, as far as the verbiage we talked about this morning and the implications of other sections in this ordinance. So. Line 1104. So we're rewording this. So basically 1104 is being replaced with line 1107. And it says the same thing, but it was an oversight. So if somebody doesn't want to include the land subject to the public road right away, they always do have an option, and always have had the option to dedicate that portion to the public. It was just an oversight. They don't need to include it, but it needs to be accounted for. Either include it in your lot or dedicate it to the public. We don't see a dedication very often, but it is an option that in the past we didn't allow for. Line 1115, we want to strike that. This got another thumbs up from the town of Elk Mound. So it has to do with habitable structures, more than one of those on all newly created lots. Line 1118 is a new provision. And this was an oversight as well, retracement certified survey map. So if I have a 2-acre piece of land that was originally created in 1960, never had a survey done on it, and I'm the 8th owner of it now, and I just all of a sudden want to have a certified survey map on it, it should not be bound by the requirements in this section.
I just didn't know what retracement in this context meant.
So a retracement means you're not creating a new parcel, you're just better clarifying an existing parcel. So for an example, let's say my legal description created in 1960 says the south 300 feet of the west 500 feet of the northwest. That's what I took title to. Never had a survey, don't know where my property lines are, and I call a surveyor up to come out and mark my boundaries, the surveyor could say, hey, I'll do a map of survey. We'll file that with the county surveyor's office. So it's of record. I'll put iron pipe at your four corners, or I could do a certified survey map for you. So the next time you convey it, you don't have to describe it as the south 300 feet of the west 500. You can refer to it now as lot 1 of certified survey map number. So it's just better clarifying a previous legal description that didn't have reference to a lot or outlot on a plat or certified survey map. Not creating any new parcels, just giving it a different identity for description and taxation purposes.
And there are some, there are some parcels where the legal description is literally a page and a half long. Because of conveyances and exceptions and so forth, over a course of 100 years. And this would allow someone to, instead of having that page and a half legal description and, creating a risk of error, lot 1 of certified survey map 12, that'd be the whole legal description. So it improves the quality of land records.
Yes, and some of these, thank you, Nick, and some of these parcels are quite small. They might only be a half of an acre. Well, our ordinance would prevent somebody from doing a certified survey map on that parcel if it's not an acre. And should we really be restricting them from doing that? So again, this was an oversight that we should have had in there. Very good question. And then line 1120 is the same. It's a new provision. Newly created lots. Oh, so this was in several sections earlier where I talked how we're not removing it, we're just relocating it. So this is a lot standard, right? And it showed up in other sections of the ordinance, and we just feel if it's a lot standard, let's put it in the lot standard section. So that's line 1120. We're just about done. Line 1131 is some minor formatting changes. Line 1193. We're adding verbiage to allow for multiple variance requests to be included on one application. And then in conjunction with this, we've also made one minor modification to our fee schedule. I'll get to that here. Well, let's just jump down to that, I guess. So here's the fee schedule. So often, I wouldn't say often, but occasionally we get people or landowners that need to have more than one variance request. And we've often struggled with this. Well, do we charge them $200 per request? Seems a little unfair because we've already got most of the background work done and a staff report already prepared. So we're looking at a tiered approach where you can combine multiple variance requests on one form. And then in order to make the fee schedule in harmony with that and not lose any revenue in the process, I'm proposing we drop the base fee down to $150 and then have a per variance fee of $50. So if somebody has the base level one variance request, we're still going to recover $200 on that. But now that allows them to piggyback on multiple requests without, spending $200 per request. So that would be the only change that I'm recommending in the fee schedule.
And that's requests aggregated within one application or one variance or one application for variance. So if someone were to request a variance a year later after they've already done one, this would not be considered part of the old request. It would be a new request. It's just to allow more than one to come in at the same time on the same application.
Any questions on that? Okay, line 1214. Some minor formatting changes, and then line 1217 is something that was missing, original oversight. And we have language in our current zoning ordinance that speaks to this. So I pulled that language out, condensed it somewhat into one sentence. So it attached, once the variance is granted, it attaches to the property as a permanent right for the current owner and all subsequent owners. I've gotten questions on that. does the variance expire when I'm no longer, it was granted to me, Tom Carlson, but when I sell the land to Joe Smith, does he get to take advantage of that? And the intention is yes, but the ordinance was silent on that. So that concludes the amendments that we would like to see to this ordinance. I believe I covered all of Mr. Christopherson's comments. And I will turn it back over to you, Tom. I guess before I do that, procedural wise, we will have to hold a public hearing to make amendments to the ordinance. Once that hearing is conducted, then we will have to take this to the county board for 2 readings before it becomes official and adopted. So we're looking at probably best case end of summer, mid to end of summer, if we were to schedule a public hearing ASAP. I don't know if we're at that point. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, we have a chance to sort of make sure we are on the same page before we go to public hearings. It's hard to change things at a public hearing. So my thought would be we should do at least one more review after you've had a chance to make the adjustments you want and bring it back. And then we can get perhaps more input from the public too on that before we codify it. So can we do that, Tom? At your convenience?
Sure, I'll work with Corp Counsel on some of the things we talked about this morning, and we'll bring it back at another meeting before we hold a public hearing.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Could I know it's getting late, but could I ask a general question? Anybody can answer there. In your reasoning in the beginning and a couple times today, you've talked about land use versus lot standards. Maybe lot standards isn't the right, but not regulating land use with the subdivision ordinance. Could you just kind of differentiate that a little bit so I understand it a little better? Briefly? You got till 11.
Well, I won't need till 11, but I may turn it over to Ann too. I'm sure she's just dying to comment on this. I guess in its most basic and simple term, I mean, land use is what can I do? Can I put a duplex on the property? Obviously we're not regulating that, right? With the land division ordinance, we're not there's no provision in here saying no duplexes are allowed on any newly created lots. So, land division is more the size of the parcel, the shape, frontage, access requirements, technical information that has to be shown as part of the division process. As far as what the land is going to be used for, I don't mean this to sound callous in any way, but I shouldn't care what Joe Smith is using that property for, as long as he's meeting our ordinance standards. He's going to have to deal with Ann, and we're regulating land use in the land or in the comprehensive zoning ordinance. And that's a whole different ordinance set up for a whole different purpose. And the two go hand in hand, right? I mean, if I'm going to divide some property, I better make sure that I'm complying with the county land division ordinance. But now, and so often I get asked, Tom, well, what can I do with this property? I get asked zoning questions almost daily. And that's not what I oversee. I always refer them to Ann. If you have a land use question, you need to comply with chapter 13 or the shoreland ordinance or the floodplain ordinance. And those are all standalone ordinances. We shouldn't be telling somebody in the land division ordinance that you better only put one house on here. Otherwise, we're going to come after you and give you a fine. If the town of Elk Mound, who is unzoned, is okay with having multiple residences on a parcel, then that's where it should be regulated. The county, in my opinion, shouldn't be telling those landowners in New Haven or Springbrook or, any of the other unzoned towns. We shouldn't be regulating the land use in those towns. They should be doing that.
Okay, that kind of differentiates a little bit. So there's a stated purpose for this subdivision ordinance. Number 1 says to promote the wise use, conservation, protection, property development. Property development almost sounds like land use. County soil, wetland, woodland, and wildlife. This is first page, line 6. And to achieve a balanced relationship between land use and development, supporting and sustaining Dunn County's natural resource base. Does that almost sound like you were looking to regulate the use a little bit? If I read that just alone without your explanation, I might think, well, oh, this is close to wetland, so we're not gonna allow you to build on this amount of land, or, I don't know, how does that relate?
I guess the word use is in there. I'll give you that. Line 6 says wise use. But I guess I don't look at it, I look at it as a more general term. In other words, okay, there's a whole bunch of wetlands out here. We shouldn't let you create a lot here that has not enough area on it for a buildable site or property development. So we restrict the number of splits that can be done on a 40. You can do 4 splits per 40 in a 5-year period. So I guess that's where I'm looking at the land division ordinance to give us some guidance, not so much what type of a structure am I going to put here or what type of development is going here. It's more generally speaking. Does that answer your
That
question?
really helps me out. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
a couple of questions.
sure.
Next time, like maybe my eyes are getting bad, but it's hard reading when you got the draft over
Yeah,
the colored ones. In black, it comes out for me perfect. Otherwise, the red and blue, I gotta kind of squint. I
We
don't know if
can-
it's just me or,
We can change the color or make it more opaque.
okay.
Yeah.
And the other question is, how many certified survey maps before it becomes a plat? Just in my own mind. I mean, a plat, is, it can be,
So you can do 4 splits per 40 in a 5-year period if you want to exceed that. So I have 40 acres. I want to do 6 lots there right now.
and it's gotta be.
Let's back up. I want to do 6. My goal is to do six parcels on my 40. And let's say we're in an unzoned town. Because if
Mhm.
you were in a zone town that was general ag, you wouldn't be able to do that. So we're in Elk Mound. I have 40 acres. I want to do 6 lots. That's my goal for my 40. If a landowner comes in and tells me that's their plan, I give them 2 options. They can do 4 lots right now in a 5-year period with a CSM, and then they have to
Okay.
wait 5 years, they can do their last 2 lots. But if they're dead set, they want to get it done on the market because interest rates are low and they want it done by the end of this year, then their only other option is to do a subdivision plat. They can do those 6 lots, but it has to go through the platting
That's what I
process.
thought it was. But I just want to make sure that, what the difference was right
Mhm.
there in that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
so this is not just an effort to shift your workload over to Ann.
No.
Well, anything else? Any other comments or notices? Thanks to all of you for working together on this and yeah, made a complicated process as uncomplicated as possible, I think. We'll see. Thank you. And we are-
And if I may, I just want to mention too, there were other departments,
Yeah.
land information had a key role in some of this too with the rural addressing. So just make sure everybody, the highway department, highway commissioner, Nick for all his help.
Yeah,
And it
thanks,
was
Nick.
a big group effort. It was not just ENS staff.
A really good job of collaboration.
Yeah. And thanks to our town board members for coming today and staying involved. Okay, with that, we're adjourned. And it isn't.